Pitbull attacked this 73-year-old woman, but her cat did the unthinkable. The blood was everywhere, splattered across the white kitchen tiles, dripping from the counter, pooling beneath the overturned chair where Eleanor Martinez lay, motionless. But it wasn't her blood. Above her, barely breathing, stood a small orange tabby cat named Rusty, his fur matted crimson, one eye swollen shut, his left front paw hanging at an unnatural angle. Behind him, the massive pit bull that had broken through the back door lay still. Its attack finally ended. Eleanor had always said Rusty was just a house cat, nothing special, just a stray she'd found shivering behind the grocery store 3 years ago. She was wrong, dead wrong. The morning had started like any other Tuesday in the quiet suburb of Maplewood. Eleanor, a 73-year-old retired librarian, was preparing her breakfast when she heard the first crash. The sound came from her backyard, sharp and violent, like wood splintering. She paused, her arthritic fingers still wrapped around the coffee mug, listening. Rusty, who'd been dozing in his favorite spot by the window, suddenly lifted his head, ears alert, green eyes focused on something beyond the glass. "What is it, boy?" Eleanor whispered, though she wasn't sure why she was whispering. The second crash was louder, closer. Then came the sound that made her blood freeze, a deep, guttural growling that seemed to vibrate through the walls of her small home. Rusty leaped from his perch and ran toward the back door. His tail bristled, every muscle in his compact body tensed. Eleanor followed, her slippers shuffling across the linoleum floor. Through the door's glass panel, she saw the source of the commotion. A massive pit bull, easily twice Rusty's size, was destroying her garden, tearing through the fence boards like they were made of paper. The dog's eyes were wild, foam dripping from its jaws, and Eleanor realized with growing horror that this wasn't normal aggressive behavior. This animal was rabid. The back door had never seemed so flimsy. The pit bull had noticed her through the glass and was now focused entirely on getting inside. It rammed against the door with its full weight, and Eleanor heard the wood frame crack. She stumbled backward, reaching for her phone, but her hands were shaking too badly to dial. That's when Rusty made his choice. As the door finally gave way and the pit bull burst into her kitchen, Rusty didn't run. He didn't hide under the furniture or flee to the basement like any sensible house cat would do. Instead, he positioned himself directly between Eleanor and the charging predator, his small body a laughable barrier against the snarling beast that outweighed him by 60 pounds. The pit bull barely noticed the cat at first, focused as it was on reaching Eleanor, but Rusty had other plans. With a yowl that seemed impossible for such a small creature, he launched himself directly at the dog's face, claws extended, aiming for the eyes. The impact sent both animals tumbling across the kitchen floor, but Rusty held on, his claws buried deep in the pit bull's snout. Eleanor screamed and tried to reach for a knife from the counter, but the fighting animals were everywhere at once, a whirlwind of fur and teeth and desperate violence. The pit bull shook its massive head, trying to dislodge the cat, but Rusty held on with the tenacity of a creature fighting for something more precious than his own life. The first real injury came when the pit bull managed to grab Rusty's left front leg in its jaws. Eleanor heard the crack of bones breaking and Rusty's agonized cry, but still the cat didn't let go. If anything, he fought harder, raking his back claws across the dog's neck, drawing deep furrows that bled freely. What followed was the longest 3 minutes of Eleanor's life. The kitchen became a war zone as the two animals battled with primal fury. Chairs overturned, dishes shattered, and through it all, Rusty never gave ground. Every time the pit bull tried to advance toward Eleanor, the cat somehow managed to redirect its attention back to himself, taking punishment that should have killed a creature his size. The pit bull's jaws found Rusty's ribs, crushing down with tremendous force. Eleanor heard more bones crack, saw Rusty's body go limp for a terrifying moment, but then he rallied, twisting in the dog's grip to rake his remaining good paw across its eyes. The pit bull released him with a howl of pain, blood streaming from deep scratches across its face. Rusty landed hard on the kitchen floor, his breathing labored, blood matting his orange fur. One of his eyes was swollen completely shut, his left front paw hung useless, and Eleanor could see the unnatural way his ribs moved when he breathed. But he still positioned himself between her and the pit bull, his good eye fixed on the larger animal with unbreakable determination. The pit bull, partially blinded and bleeding from multiple wounds, charged again. This time, Rusty couldn't dodge quickly enough. The dog's teeth found his shoulder, lifting him off the ground and shaking him like a toy. Eleanor was certain this was the end. No cat could survive such treatment. But Rusty had one more trick. With his last reserves of strength, he twisted in the pit bull's grip and managed to wrap his body around the dog's throat, his remaining claws finding the soft tissue of the neck. The pit bull panicked, releasing its grip to try to dislodge the cat, but Rusty held on with everything he had left. His claws found something vital, a major blood vessel, and suddenly the pit bull's struggles became weaker. The end came not with dramatic violence, but with a quiet settling. The pit bull's movement slowed, then stopped entirely. Rusty released his grip and collapsed to the floor, his small chest rising and falling in rapid, shallow breaths. Eleanor knelt beside him, her own body shaking with shock and adrenaline. Rusty's injuries were severe, possibly fatal, but his good eye focused on her face with what she could only describe as satisfaction. He had done what he set out to do. She was safe. The paramedics arrived first, followed closely by animal control and the police. Eleanor refused to leave Rusty's side as they carefully transported him to the emergency veterinary clinic. Dr. Sarah Chen, the veterinarian on duty, took one look at the small cat and shook her head. "I won't lie to you, Mrs. Martinez," she said gently. "His injuries are extensive. Broken ribs, a shattered front leg, severe internal bleeding, and significant tissue damage. Most cats wouldn't have survived the initial attack, let alone continued fighting. I'm not sure we can save him." Eleanor gripped Rusty's good paw gently. "Please try," she whispered. "He saved my life. He deserves a chance." The surgery lasted 4 hours. Dr. Chen emerged exhausted, her scrub stained with blood, but her expression cautiously optimistic. "He's alive," she announced. "Barely, but alive. We've managed to stop the internal bleeding and set his broken bones. The next 24 hours will be critical." Eleanor spent that night in the clinic's waiting room, dozing fitfully in an uncomfortable chair. Every hour, Dr. Chen would emerge with an update. Rusty's condition was touch and go. His heart had stopped twice during surgery, but each time they managed to revive him. His will to live was extraordinary. By morning, Rusty had stabilized enough for Eleanor to see him. He lay in a small recovery cage, his orange fur partially shaved, tubes and wires connecting him to various monitors. His left front leg was in a cast, his ribs were wrapped, and his face was swollen almost beyond recognition. But when Eleanor spoke his name, his one good eye opened and focused on her. "Hello, brave boy," she whispered, reaching through the cage bars to stroke his head gently. "You did it. You saved me." The story of Rusty's heroism spread quickly through the small community of Maplewood. The local newspaper ran a front-page article with the headline, "House Cat Saves Owner from Rabid Dog Attack." The story was picked up by regional news stations, then national ones. Soon, Eleanor's phone was ringing constantly with interview requests, but she only cared about one thing, Rusty's recovery. It was slow and painful. For the first week, he barely moved, existing in a haze of pain medication and exhaustion. Gradually, though, his strength began to return. He started eating again, first just small amounts of liquid food, then eventually returning to his regular diet. The hardest part was learning to walk again. His left front paw would never be the same. The bones had been too badly damaged to heal perfectly. Dr. Chen warned Eleanor that Rusty would have a permanent limp, that his fighting days were definitely over. Eleanor almost laughed at that. After what she'd witnessed, she was quite content to have Rusty retire from heroics. 3 weeks after the attack, Rusty came home. Eleanor had prepared everything perfectly, a soft bed by his favorite window, his food and water dishes positioned so he wouldn't have to stretch his healing ribs, and plenty of his favorite treats. But what struck her most was how he immediately went to the kitchen, the scene of his great battle, and sat down exactly where he had made his stand. The physical scars healed slowly. Rusty's limp became less pronounced over time, though he never regained full use of his left paw. The emotional scars, Eleanor discovered, were different. Rusty had always been a friendly, social cat, but now he was different, more alert, more protective. He followed Eleanor everywhere, positioning himself between her and any potential threat, even something as innocuous as the mailman at the front door. The community didn't forget what Rusty had done. The mayor presented him with a key to the city in a ceremony at the town hall. The local pet store established a fund to help pay for his medical bills, which had exceeded $12,000. Children from the elementary school sent him drawings and get-well cards. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. 3 months after the attack, Eleanor received a visit from Marcus Williams, a young soldier who had recently returned from deployment overseas. He'd heard Rusty's story and wanted to meet the cat who had shown the kind of courage he'd seen in his fellow soldiers. "Ma'am," he said, kneeling down to Rusty's level, "I've served with some brave men and women, but what your cat did, that's the kind of courage they give medals for." Rusty, still bearing the visible scars of his battle, allowed the young soldier to pet him gently. Eleanor watched as Marcus's eyes filled with tears. "And I lost my buddy in Afghanistan," Marcus continued quietly. "He threw himself on a grenade to save the rest of us. When I heard about Rusty, it reminded me that courage isn't about size or strength. It's about what you're willing to sacrifice for someone you love." Eleanor found herself crying too. She had always known Rusty was special, but she was beginning to understand that what he had done transcended the simple story of a pet protecting its owner. He had demonstrated something fundamental about loyalty, love, and sacrifice that touched people deeply. A year later, Rusty's story was still being told. A children's book author had written a story based on his heroism, with proceeds going to animal rescue organizations. A bronze statue of a small cat was erected in Maplewood's Central Park, with a plaque that read, "In honor of Rusty, who showed us that true courage comes in all sizes." Eleanor often sat on the bench near that statue with Rusty beside her, his orange fur now showing silver threads, his movements careful but dignified. People would stop to meet the famous cat, and Eleanor would tell his story again, never tiring of sharing how her ordinary house cat had turned out to be the bravest creature she'd ever known. But the real impact of Rusty's heroism was quieter, more personal. Eleanor, who had lived alone since her husband's death 5 years earlier, no longer felt vulnerable or afraid. She had seen what love could accomplish, had witnessed the power of absolute loyalty. Every morning when she woke to find Rusty sleeping beside her bed, one eye always alert, even in sleep, she was reminded that she was protected by something more powerful than security systems or locked doors. Rusty had given her more than her life. He had given her back her courage, her faith in the goodness that existed in the world. And in return, she had given him something equally precious, the chance to be the hero he was always meant to be. As the sun set over Maplewood, Eleanor reached down to stroke Rusty's head gently. He looked up at her with his mismatched eyes, one bright green, one clouded by the scars of battle, and purred. It was a sound of complete contentment, the sound of a job well done, a promise kept, a love proven beyond any doubt. In a world that often seemed dark and uncertain, Rusty had shown that sometimes the greatest heroes come in the smallest packages, and that love, when truly tested, will always find a way to triumph.